As she looked out across the dappled silvery plain, there was a bloom of soft crimson light at one side of it. Dairine held still to watch the sunrise. It was a fat red star, far along in its lifetime, so far along, so cool, that there was water vapor in its atmosphere, and even in the vacuum of space it hung in a softly glowing, rose-colored haze, like an earthly summer sunset. It climbed the sky swiftly, and Dairine watched it in silence. Quiet a day, she thought, but whether it's morning here or not, I need a nap. She turned around and started to head back toward the computer, and froze. One patch of the planet's surface was moving. Something underneath it was humping upward, and cracks appeared in the perfect smoothness. There was no sound, of course, since Dairine's air supply was nowhere near the spot. The cracks webbed outward in total silence. And then the crust cracked upward in jagged pieces, and the something underneath pushed through and up and out. Bits of silica glass fell slowly in the light gravity and bounced or shattered in a snow of splinters around the rounded shape that stood there. Stood was the right word, for it had legs, though short, stumpy ones, as if a toy tank had thrown away its treads and grown limbs instead. It shook itself, the rounded, glassy, glittering thing, and walked over to Dairine and through her shields with a gait like a centipede's or a clockwork toy's, and it looked up at her, if something like a turtle with no head can be said to look up. "Light," it croaked, in a passable imitation of the computer's voice, and bumped against her shin, and rested there. It was too much. Dairine sat down where she was and looked at the computer. "I can't cope," she said. The computer had no reply for this. "I can't," she said. "Make me some more air, please, and call me if they start chasing us again." "No problem," said the computer. She lay down on the smooth, glassy ground, gazing at the rounded, glittery thing that stood on its 14 stumpy legs and gazed back at her. No more than 6 breaths later, she was asleep. So she did not see, an hour and a half later, when the sun, at its meridian, began to pucker and twist out of shape, and for the best part of the hour lost half of itself, and shone only feebly, warped and dimmed. Her companion saw it, and said to the computer, "What?" "Darkness," said the computer, and nothing more. Reserved words. They got to Rearhoth B early in the evening, arriving at the crossings just after sun's set, and just as the sky was clearing. Nita and Kit stood there in the non-typical transit area for a few moments, staring up at the ceiling like the rankest tourists. Pichu sat on Kit's shoulder, completely unruffled, and ignored everything with yawning scorn, though the view through the now clear ceiling was worth seeing. "My brains are rattled," Kit said, breathing hard. "I need a minute." So did Nita, and she felt vaguely relieved that Kit had said something about it first, so she just nodded and craned her neck and stared up. The view was worth looking at. This sudden revelation of Rearhoth's sky, a glorious concatenation of short-term variable stars, swelling and shrinking like living things that breathed and whose hearts beat fire. All over the crossings, people of every species passing through were pausing, looking up at the same sight and admiring the completeness with which a perfectly solid-seeming ceiling now seemed to have gone away. Others, travelers who had seen it all before or were just too tired to care, went on about their business and didn't bother to look. "We only have a couple of days," Pichu said, chewing on the collar of Kit's shirt. "Peach," Nita said, "shut your face." "You better?" she said to Kit. "Yeah," he said. "You?" "I was dizzy. It's okay now." "Super." He flipped through his manual, open in his hand, and came up with a map of the crossings. "What do we need to find?" "Station master's office?" "Right. They checked out of non-typical transit, leaving their origin and destination information with the computer at the entrance, and set out across the expanse of the terminal floor, looking around them in calm wonder. For though neither of them had ever been there, both had read enough about the crossings in their manuals to know what to expect. They knew there had been a time when the crossings itself was only a reed hut by a riverside, and the single world gate nearby only a muddy spot in a cave that the first master stumbled upon by accident and claimed for its heirs, after waiting several years on Erarik for the gate to reverse phase so that he could get home. Now, a couple of 1,000 years' worth of technology later, world gates were generated here at the drop of a whim, and the station master regulated interstellar commerce and transportation via world gating for the entire Sagittarius arm. Its office was not off in some sheltered spot away from the craziness, but out in the very middle of the station floor, that being the spot where the hut had been 2,430 years before. It was only a single modest kiosk of tubular blue steel with a desk behind it, and at the desk, hung up in a rack that looked like a large step stool, was a single rear hate, banging busily on a computer terminal keypad and making small noises to itself as it worked. Nita and Kit stopped in front of the desk, and the rear hate looked up at them. Or more or less up. Some of its stalked eyes looked down instead, and a few peered from the sides. It stopped typing. "Well," it said, scratchy-voiced. Understandable, Nita thought, when you've got a gullet full of sand. "You're the station master?" Kit said. "Yes," said the rear hate, and the fact that it said nothing else but looked at Kit hungrily, with its scissory mandibles working, made Nita twitch a little. "We are on errantry, and we greet you," Nita said, the standard self-introduction of a wizard on business. Sir or Madam, one normally added, but Nita wasn't sure which the master was, or even if either term applied. "That, too?" said the master, looking at Pichu. "Yes, that," said Peach, all scorn. "Well, it's about time you people got here," said the master, and left off what it was doing, standing up. Standing was an approximation. A rear hate is shaped more like a centipede than anything else, so that when it got off its rack and came out from behind the desk, its long, shiny, silver-blue body only stood a foot or so off the ground, and all its eyes looked up at them together. "We had more of an untidiness here this afternoon than we've had for a great year past, and I'll be glad to see the end of it." Nita began to sweat. "The wizard who came through here earlier was on ordeal," Kit said. "We'll need your help to find the spot from which she went farther on, so that we can track her. There are too many other world gates here, and they're confusing the trail." "She didn't cause any trouble, did she?" Nita said. "Trouble?" said the station master, and led them off across the bright floor and showed them the place where several large pieces of the ceiling had been shot down. "Trouble?" it said, pointing out the places where the floors were melted, indicating the blaster scars in the kiosks and the large cordoned-off area where maintenance people of various species were scraping and scrubbing coffee-ground-smelling residue off the floor. "Oh, no trouble. Not really." Pichu began to laugh, a wicked and appreciative sound. Nita blushed ferociously and didn't say anything for several minutes. The rear hate led them off to another area of the floor that was closed in on itself by an arrangement of blue steel kiosks. This was Crossing's security. Various desks stood about inside it, with creatures of several species working at them. The master led them to one of the unoccupied desks, a low, flat table full of incomprehensible equipment. "Here," it said, and reared up on its back 10 legs to touch the machinery in several places. Small and clear, an image appeared above the table. Remote, but equally clear, sound accompanied it. Nita and Kit found themselves looking at the Crossings equivalent of a videotape, but in 3 dimensions, with neat alien characters burning in the lower corner of it to show the time and location at which the recording was made. They watched a group of toad-like Bems make their way across the terminal floor, spot Dairine, head off in pursuit. They watched Dairine deal with the Deinonychus, and afterward with the bem that grabbed her. Nita gulped. "They look like satrachi," Kit said, astonishingly cool-voiced. Nita's eyebrows went up. Alien species were her specialty. Evidently, Kit had been doing some extra research. "They are, as far as we can tell," said the master. "The one of them whom we have in custody has valid Satra identification." "We'll need to see this person, then," Nita said. The tape ran. Nita watched Irene's dive into the bar, and from another camera angle, her sister's reemergence into the terminal and dash into the restroom. Nita groaned, recognizing the room by the symbol on its door as a spawning room for any one of several species that gave birth to their young on the average of once every few days, and were likely to be caught short while traveling on business. Nita hoped that Irene hadn't introduced one of the species involved to a completely new kind of birth trauma. That was the spot she left from? Yes, emissary. It was the first time Nita had ever been formally called by one of the 20 or so titles commonly used for wizards, but she was too busy now to enjoy it. She glanced at Kit. He was frowning at the image hanging in the air. Finally, his concentration broke, and he glanced at her. "Well," he said, "you want to talk to the satrachi?" "I'd better," she said, though she very much wanted not to. The looks of the satrachi gave her the creeps. But dealing with live things was her department. The handling of machinery and inanimate objects was Kit's. "You go ahead and check the room out. Station master, can you have someone show me where it's being held?" "Step on that square there," said the master, pointing one eye at a spot on the floor. "It's direct transit to holding. Emissary, I'll show you to the room in question." Nita stepped on the block quickly before she would have time to change her mind. 15 minutes with it told her all she needed to know. The Satra was a dupe. It and its friends, a small paramilitary club, deluded into pursuing Irene by some agent of the Lone One. It's the usual thing, she thought as she headed back to Kit and the station master. The power never comes out in the open if it can find some way to make someone else do its dirty work. Preferably an innocent. That way it's more of a slap in the bright power's face. Unusual, though, that it used a whole group this time. Normally, it's hard to keep that subtle a grip on a whole group's mind. One of them slips free or perceives it as control, and when that happens, odds are that the whole group is useless for its purposes. She strolled among aliens and their luggage, and finally came to the little Grand Central-sized alcove where Irene's restroom was. Its door was frozen in the dilated mode. Nita slipped in and found Kit and Pichu and the master off to one side, examining one particular birthing booth. It seemed to have had its door burned off, and the back of the booth was blistered and pocked with an ugly rash of blaster scars. For a good second or so, her breath refused to come. "She jumped after that?" Nita finally managed to say. Kit looked over his shoulder at her. "Neats, relax, there are no bloodstains." "There wouldn't be with blasters," Nita said. "They cauterize." "Any really big wound would spurt anyway," Kit said, straightening up and starting to page through his manual. "I think they missed her. The tiles don't remember her screaming, and not even Irene's that stoic." He kept turning over pages. "How far did she go?" "A long jump," Kit said. "Multi-stage from the feel of it. They must have freaked her out pretty good." He looked up. "That computer she's got leaves a definite sense of what it's been doing behind it. Can you feel it?" Nita let her eyes go unfocused for a moment and blanked her mind out, as she might do to hear the thinking of some particularly quiet tree. Some residue of Irene's emotion still hung about the strings in the space-time configuration of the area, like tatters on a barbed wire fence. Fear and defiance, all tangled up together. And alongside her tatters, others, ordered and regular, a weave less vivid and complex in different ways. "It feels alive," Nita said to Kit after a while. "Do computers usually feel that way?" "I don't know," Kit said, sounding annoyed. "I never tried feeling one before this." "You got your widget?" he said. "We're going to need it to catch up with her and her friends."